Good afternoon, everybody. How are we doing?
Good.
Very
How's it
well.
going, Ursula?
Afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you everybody for joining us live as well. Christian and Kevin, thank you again. We have quite a few guests who might be joining us, who might not be joining us. It's Wednesday, so it's a busy day. So what we have today for you guys is a virtual roundtable on the topic of screening. This year, I don't know about you two, Kevin and Christian, but I found screening to be uh, quite a big topic. There's some been funding going on there, a lot of companies coming to us asking us to benchmark the scene, ask us to tell the differentiator between this tool, that tool. So we thought we put this together, invite some leaders from screening providers like yourselves to tell us more about the market, educate us, and hopefully we can let this be a masterclass for everyone interested. So without further ado, I'll let everybody introduce themselves. So Kevin, why don't you start, and then Christian, we'd love to hear about both of you guys, what you do and your companies as well.
Brilliant. Thanks, Arslan. Good to see you again. My name's Kevin McGuinness. I head up strategy at Napier AI. Napier AI, our next generation AML technology, helping institutions globally combat the risks of financial crime with a firm focus on customer name screening, transaction and payment screening, and transaction monitoring. And good to be with you here today.
Hey, I'm Chris Focacci. I'm the founder and CEO of Threat.Digital. By way of background, I've been in the financial crime compliance world for now unbelievably close to 20 years. I started my career really in the working for the banks, enhanced due diligence, transaction monitoring. And for the last 12-ish years, I've now worked on solutions specifically building screening, adverse media, risk databases, kind of everything you could think of across the board in that world of risk intelligence and name matching and sanction screening. So excited to be here.
Thank you. So let me pop off right away to Christian. So and then we'll go over to Kevin. Why did you choose screening? So you worked in the field. You saw a lot of problems from KYB to onboarding. What was particularly about screening that you saw an opportunity to go in and improve the process?
Yeah, it's really the screening is a component of it, but the bigger picture of where I chose to focus was on external information, because in banks they have internal information, transaction monitoring, and then a lot of the work they do is with external data, sanction screening lists, adverse media, etc. So being an investigator for years, pretty much anytime I was finding something important that was risk relevant, it was coming from external information, right? We would get a transaction monitoring alert and it would say, okay, Kevin sent me $1 million. Thank you, Kevin. And I would investigate that in the bank and we wouldn't know why, right? We'd say, okay, they both work for companies, but there's not really any context and there's so much limited information. So maybe you file a suspicious activity report or a transaction report, but ultimately you didn't have much context. What changed that is then when you bring in external information, you start searching news and say, oh, Christian actually works for this company. And then this company has an event that's adverse where they were involved in money laundering. That changes the lens of what that transaction looks like. And almost to the case, anything that I researched or investigated that came to fruition is something that's really risk relevant. The impetus for that was external risk data. So the challenge of that, though, was just there was so much of it. And now I've been doing it since 2013. AI and machine learning has advanced, but we still had the problem of we're looking at the sea of information. How do we know what's relevant in that information? And what people are doing, and they still do, is check a database, which is limited. They run a Google search, right, which is hard to parse. So we still kind of have the same problems, but that's specifically why I focused on that external information component, and then that evolves into screening, which is kind of the natural extension of that.
Thank you. And Kevin, what do you think about what Christian was saying, and how did you guys get started? Why screening? And tell me about the Napier AI part of the Napier.
Yeah, look, like Christian, it's hard to believe I've been in the industry about 21, 22 years myself. Started off the career in banking across NatWest Group and Citi, then moved into PwC where I helped work and lead part of their financial crime team in the UK. And then subsequent to that, I moved into a company called First Derivatives, who were an Irish-based consultancy listed on the London Stock Exchange, and helped them establish a client lifecycle management practice supporting pretty much global customers, combat, CDD, onboarding, refresh, and essentially then screening and monitoring. And during that period, I'm sure Christian will also attest to it. There was a lot of bad technology floating around, and that form of KYC really became known as kill your career, because if you implemented it and didn't get it quite right, typically you would have to fix it, remediate, and come up with a better solution. And it was during my time at First Derivatives where I was doing some of that remediation activity, or my teams were delivering them programs, that I first encountered the Napier technology. It was deployed quite extensively across fund administrators, capital markets clients, banking clients, and I really liked it. And I seen the accuracy that came with working with the software. And then whenever I was helping customers go through remediation, I would typically then suggest change. And by way of change, bringing in better, more efficient, more accurate technology. And that's where I got introduced to what was at that point the Napier team. I subsequently left First Derivatives and decided to come across to Napier and head up their solutions team. And at that point, like Christian said, I was just seeing a real focus on list management, making sure the right information was coming through to the platform, how we were able then to use secondary scoring to narrow down the margin for error and ultimately give customers a more accurate reflection as to where the risk existed within their business. And moreover than that, then reduce the false positives and create operational efficiencies. And that's very much been the focus of Napier. We very much take a compliance first approach to AI or machine learning. And it's not just agentic AI or AI for the sake of it. It's making sure that where we deploy AI within the compliance agenda, it reflects that accuracy and efficiency that our customers need. Every day, new challenges, every day, new obstacles, but it's really cool to be working in this space and just basically trying to get it right for our customers. So yeah, that's pretty much where we are today.
Thank you for that. So that was the context of how you guys got started and why screening. I'm gonna role play myself, which is an idiot, and pretend like I don't know anything about sanctions, PEP, and screening. So tell me about, where do companies originally, back in early 2000s and kind of late 2010s, where were they sourcing their data from for sanctions, PEP, and what these watch lists? And for Napier, did you guys tap into the same watch list? Did you aggregate them? Are you building your own? And similarly, Christian, for you, I mean, for adverse media, there wasn't a lot of watch lists, so you probably had to create your own kind of a scraping mechanism. But talk to me about, where do typically providers get their data from? And talk to me about the data itself. Is it good data? Is it needs to be refreshed from your end, or maybe the actual source needs to refresh it with good hygiene?
Yeah, well, I'll take that one first, and it'll probably be a more succinct and not as detailed a response as Christian will provide. But for Napier, we are very much data agnostic when it comes to intelligence data providers. We have full integration compatibility with LexisNexis, with Dow Jones, and LSEG, Refinitiv. And fundamentally, what we try to do then is to work with the customer who already has a knowledge and understanding of these providers. And then we integrate it into the Napier software. Within the solution, then we would give customers a high degree of configurability, depending on what they want to see for a sanctions list, what they may want to see for a PEP. And fundamentally, if there's any structured adverse media, we will give the customer then the ability to configure, refine, and ultimately dissect what they want to see from the list management providers. And that's been quite powerful in itself, because if you're a UK bank and you only deal with a certain customer segment, you may not necessarily need to match against certain lists on a global capacity. So even the ability to refine those lists and make them more pinpointed is a big accelerator for our customers. It's also good to note that some of our customers are very sophisticated with regards to how they manage their own lists. So we have the ability within the platform for customers to not only match against what would be an intelligence data provider in the market, but also then to upload either on a daily or bi-daily basis their own internal lists, and we will match against them to give them certain coverage, whether it be a UK bank who has an offshore footprint in maybe Jersey, Guernsey, Isle of Man. They may then have a grey list that they want to match against, and we will give them that same compatibility as they would with using an external provider. And for the large part, the lists that we match against are good, they're strong. They're very auditable. You have clear transparency with regards to which list is being matched, at which point a customer name was being brought back for further review. And compared to where we were probably 10 years ago, I think it has become a lot more refined and a lot more sophisticated. But yeah, as always, more work to do, and I'd be keen to understand, Christian, from your perspective, what you're typically seeing from your own world.
The history of data providers. We can have a whole other kind of webinar on that. Yeah, so it's really easy if you kind of have like stacks of level of data of what you're screening against, right? The most basic is sanctions information. And we serve across financial services and corporates who also have their trade compliance and have CPA groups. The financial services are a little further ahead just because they've been doing it longer. It's not necessarily better, they've just been doing it longer. So they have slightly different needs. But at the base level is sanctions data, right? From global governments who say, here's a list of people you can't do business with. That information is publicly available. Some companies just go directly to the lists and then consume that, right? That misses a lot because that's only official sanctions. That's kind of just like the base level of your regulatory obligation. Past that, you have the risk data providers, is that class, and they started in the early 2000s. That's RDC, which is now Moody's, WorldCheck, which is now London Stock Exchange. As you can see, there's a lot of consolidation in that space over the last 25 years of data providers. Dow Jones, like Evans, and LexisNexis. Those are kind of the core original ones. And how they work is they have curation teams who are reviewing lists, media, making really profiles. Okay, here's Christian Focacci, here's what we know about him. Those providers have between 2 and 10 million profiles, depending on the one you go. They have various levels of coverage, various levels of data quality. In 2013-ish, we started to see more entries coming into the space. My last company, Transparent, entered the space with a kind of machine learning approach, as did ComplyAdvantage, which was really competing to that legacy data provider space. It's a tough business to crack into, just because once you have that integrated, it's kind of sticky and you don't want to move it. And there's risk switching different lists and all kinds of things that once you get that business, it's pretty sticky. More recently, now with AI, we're starting to see some more companies come in the space. The only other category, though, you see is kind of the beneficial ownership, which is not technically screening, but we have now new regulation which changed of OFAC and different 50% rules, right? You can't do business with someone who's 50% owned by a sanction list. Some of the traditional data providers will have that, like a Dow Jones and maybe a LexisNexis. But then we saw new players enter the space with the Sayaris, the Karens, those kind of companies who really focus on that very niche focused data that solves a specific regulatory problem. So it was a long-winded answer to say, it's really like the need of your specific screening is who you choose, right? If you need a risk data provider, there's the handful of original ones. There's some newer ones if you need beneficial ownership. And really, the challenge is understanding what you need so you could piece together the best solution, because one data provider is not going to have everything. Every client wants one data provider to say, here's my screening data provider. We're going to find it all and we're not going to miss anything. You can think of it like kind of a Swiss cheese model where they're all going to have some level of coverage. But if you really want to prevent the things you need to from getting through this block, you have to kind of plug up all the holes. And they all have a gap. And just because I've been working on it for so long as I know, as adverse media, like Kevin said, they focus on structured adverse media, which is really, derived from the news and put into a profile most of the time. That's what they say, adverse media. But a lot of times customers really think they're doing true media monitoring, where they're looking at the news and they're getting results of unstructured information. They're not. And the challenge is there's just so much news, right? Like when you're talking about 2 million profiles, you're talking about billions of web pages and news articles, and it's unwieldy. That's starting to change now, and I'm sure we'll get there with kind of more of the LLM generated solutions that understand context better. And we're getting better at parsing that. So that's kind of the whole landscape of data providers, of what they offer and who's out there.
Fabulous. So, Kevin, did you want to add to the landscape and maybe provide some further insights on what is the difference between let's say I'm a buyer, I'm a bank, I'm looking to actually scope out the market. How would I know, without being an expert in this scene, what is the difference between ComplyAdvantage and Refinitiv or WorldCheck? Do I go to WorldCheck or straight, or do I go to a more boutique setup that is a little bit more specialized? What would kind of, if you were a buyer, how would you kind of look at the screening world right now, and how would you categorize it?
Yeah, it's a really good question, actually, and I think Christian put it very well in terms of the big players continue to dominate. Maybe not the right word, but they continue to do business very successfully across the more mature, more sophisticated institutions, whether that be in banking or insurance or whatever else. So if I was a compliance lead or an MLRO within a certain business at the moment, that particular institution may say to me that it's a non-negotiable that I use LexisNexis or I use Dow Jones because there's existing relationships across the group where they provide wider data than what is needed for financial crime purposes. Therefore, from my perspective, I would be going into the market and looking for a screening solution that A, was compatible with that provider, and B, then give me the ability to really focus on the areas of the global risk framework that I wanted to really, really focus on. So it's a difficult one, but typically in our world, we're seeing increasingly that there's a comfort in going with the crowd, and there's a comfort with going with the flow. So if all of the big tier one banks in the US and the UK and Australia are all using all of the big list providers and all of the big intelligence data providers, well, if I was an emerging institution coming through, I may feel that there's a safety from a regulatory perspective in aligning to what they're, the wider tier one space is going towards. So look, no right or wrong answer. And I think increasingly with the use of AI and the use of the large language models and an ability then to aggregate and manipulate and bring the list management space closer to what customers need, there's definitely an area whereby the incumbents that provide that information may get challenged. And we have constantly providers in the market coming forward and saying, look, do the testing. We can prove it's robust. We can match and we can exceed all of the bigger players. The question would be whether or not as a risk professional and whether or not as a compliance professional, you have the confidence that that will give you coverage from a stakeholder, shareholder, and ultimately regulatory reporting perspective. So yeah, no right or wrong answer, but the big players continue to dominate what is the list space for sanction screening, certainly.
Yeah, it's like the Amazon play, isn't it? When you're looking for web hosting or services, everyone goes with AWS, puts the logo on their deck to prove that they're good. In terms of the kind of differentiators between these screening providers, in my mind, I have kind of 3 to 4 columns. The first column is the kind of the big data providers themselves. You mentioned some of them. And then the next one are the aggregators, the ones like you guys that grab all these lists, put it together, and produce one kind of a screening provider with multiple watch lists. And then there is the kind of the emerging, what I call the AI generative due diligence. And Christian, you sit in that space, I guess. And from my observation, and Kevin, we talked about this as well, and Christian as well, I feel like risk isn't often found in fixed databases because if I was a criminal, I'd change my business name every year. I'd change my own name every year as well, with small variations. So how could a watch list keep track of me, as well as on adverse media? Truly, on internet, you can find some really good forums where people discuss someone's criminal activities, or you could get into court records in Australia, like Library of Courts, or similar in UK, whereas screening providers aren't tapped into court records, which are, again, missing out in some degree of risk. Christian, talk to me about that gap and how you guys are looking to fill that. What does AI due diligence and adverse media look like to you, and what's the vision there?
Yeah, and that's not a new problem. Or that's not a new solution with AI coming into play. We knew for years that the screening providers have gaps, and they have gaps because you can't update lists or your database is fast because it's manually curated. They have editorial policies where some of them say we don't include things that are rumors and allegations, right? That makes a nice clean box for them to draw their line, but clients kind of care if something is a rumor and allegation where there's a risk issue, right? So for years, and my last company, that's why I sold against. I sold like they're not doing X, Y, Z. Proof is in the pudding. Run the test, right? And that's how you prove it. To Kevin's point, like people are risk averse. How do you prove it? You just have to show them, and you have to actually. No one buys our solutions because of our name. They buy it because it works, which is it's good. But I would rather be in the position where I could just sell it because I'm who I am. But I would rather have a solution that works. So it's been a problem for a while. What we're to though your question of like how am I thinking about adverse media? You're right. ad hoc point in time due diligence has changed, where LLMs let us automate a lot of things so we can produce due diligence research for much closer to a screening cost. And that's the big change. And it's good. So you definitely find more. And to the point, like, how you knew there was a gap, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, even now, every bank is running Google searches in addition to their risk database. They're only doing that because they know there's a lot of information out there that they're not picking up today. So that is the future, but honestly, that's the future when I started this company 2.5 years ago. So it's kind of like we've been doing that. We've been using LLMs to do this point in time due diligence research. Where I actually see things going is kind of the second or third layer. And it's using the LLMs to almost automate what the data providers are doing to produce a product that companies are more used to, but is just better. And what I mean by that is you now have, you have a P team of people who review the media. You can do a point in time where you give me a name and I run automated research, I have an AI review it, I generate a report, and that's good. But it's hard to do that at scale, especially when companies say we have 1 million names we want to screen, right? And that's where our bread and butter is at really high scale. So what you can do is you can then start taking that information and having LLMs deeper in the process to pre-process it and structure it. And then you can almost kind of do what the data providers are doing, the incumbent data providers, but you can get the benefit of having agents do it so it happens much faster, right? It's still not easy, and you still have to have checks along. And what we're doing now is kind of having agents check work that's coming in, right? So when we get some piece of unstructured information, we're actually structuring it deeper in the process. So early on, when people were putting AI and things, it was just like a chatbot, and like it was kind of silly, right? It was like, okay, here's our solution that we've had for years, and we're going to put a chatbot. Now we're an AI company. And that's fine. And you saw that across the board for years. But the real benefit is deeper in the processes. And you really need to kind of be an LLM first company to do that because you don't have all that technical debt. So you think of unstructured information, structured information, you're ingesting it, you're pulling it in, you're kind of having an agent do pre-processed automated research, and then you could generate a profile type thing. And then you could update it faster because, again, you have people do it. You could quality assurance check it faster because you can have agents do that through the process. So it's almost like where I see things going is I see things not changing too much, but the way they're done, I think we're going to see challenges of the data providers in the near future, right? Because companies are going to say, hey, we spend so much money, I'm not going to name for who, but we spend so much money for this big data provider. And if someone comes out that has a comparative data set that is more reflective of the price it costs to create, right? Because they're pricing on value, right? They're not disconnected from what any actual hard costs are. I think we're going to see changes because we know clients are unhappy with the big data providers, and that's not a knock on them. They're good for what they are, but they miss information. They get a lot of false positives, all the things you expect. And that's digressing. I'm kind of all over the place. That's why, to Kevin's point, people choose bigger data providers a lot of times because almost any data provider is going to miss information, right? You're almost guaranteed to not find something at some point. And when that happens, it's easier to say, well, we use this person or this company who everyone knows versus this little one. If you take a chance and they miss something, then it's harder to justify. So what was the question again?
Thank you for that. And
answer.
Kevin, you wrote a lot of notes. So what are your responses? What are your thoughts on what Christian said?
No, look, I mean, one thing's for sure, it isn't getting easier for institutions of all sizes to combat, because, even if we look at the payment screening agenda at the moment, and it's moving into the faster payments and it's moving into real time, you really need to have a very sophisticated partner. And then that aggregation piece that you asked about, Arslan, that becomes critical then, because if we find that the list providers are updating 4 times a day, 6 times a day, are constantly perpetual, as some of the providers claim they are, well, that's great. But fundamentally, then the customer reference data that's being matched against also needs to be perpetual or as up to date as possible. So what we find is, from a Napier perspective, the list management, A-OK, it's a non-negotiable for customers. I think Christian made a really good point there. They're priced on value, and it is valuable because if you do not have it, you don't have the confidence then to ensure that a payment can be released, or dare I say, it needs to be escalated or reported to the regulator. So what we typically find is then that will create a wave of noise in the platform and in the system that you do not want to see. So we're doing a lot of, some people will call it AI, we call it secondary scoring, whereby when we receive a match against the said list for Kevin McGuinness, who's matched against an OFAC list for human trafficking in Venezuela, well, at that point, before we put that onto a platform for the institution to review it, we will use our own aggregation tool and secondary score that based on the name matching, we believe, and based on the list matching, that there's cause for review. But we will go back into an institution's KYC data or customer reference data and say, well, our Kevin McGuinness is an Irish citizen and he was born in a certain year and he holds a certain nationality. Therefore, there's enough confidence in the aggregation of the data within a customer set that allows you then to mitigate that as a false positive. And I just fear that the aggregation piece, and Christian put it very well, it's you have to keep up or you're going to get in regulatory trouble, but there needs to become a more efficient, more smart and more controlled way of back testing to make sure that the matching that's going to be perpetual and continue to come into your system is actually, recognizing or at least alerting you to some form of risk, because otherwise it's just noise. And then we're actually taking the process further back as opposed to becoming more streamlined and more efficient. So yeah, not easy, but these are some of the tactical levers we're taking into the approach to make sure that as the always on list providers, the aggregation of the customer data remains equally as applicable to make sure that you're managing your risk.
Thank you for that. Question for you both, and I have tons of questions, but one on top of my head is, if you're kind of a new vendor, if you're a new buyer looking to buy a solution, is it best for you to buy an aggregated tool? Is it best for you to buy a tool that has AI? Or is it best for you to, like you said, go with the big players because of the insurance, because of the reliability? Again, if I'm an investment firm, a bank, I come into the market, there's ComplyAdvantage, there's LSEG, there's the big, Dun & Bradstreet's who also sell now screening on top of KYB. And then the proposition they bring to the table is what I feel like is lacking on just screening providers alone, which is on screening alone, you're not able to find the involvements, the name of the entities, the companies. And without that, how can you find other sanctioned individuals? Like Holland Barrett, you wouldn't necessarily know until you sanction the entity that there's Russian oligarchs involved and what those are, what the risk details are. So talk to me about that. Do your customers often come to you and say, hey, do you have KYB? Do you tap in or do you API with other people? Or are they just looking for the screening and screening alone?
It's a really good question. I think both and all of the above, depending on where they are in their own life cycle from a technology and compliance perspective. Increasingly, what we see certainly in the market is that if you have a very good client onboarding platform and you also have a good KYC refresh, both for ad hoc reviews or periodic reviews, largely speaking, it's embedded within your tech infrastructure, your operational infrastructure, and you're happy with it. That being said, you may just have an API bringing you in basic sanction screening. And as the world evolves, pardon me, from a risk perspective, you can then choose what would be an ongoing automated financial crime solution for sanction screening, for PEPs, for adverse media, or for some of the beneficial ownership criteria that's coming through on the list now. So what you will find is once you've onboarded the customer, you would then pass that record of fact over to a wider provider and they would give you the continuous monitoring. So you will have a first line operations team doing your onboarding and KYC, and then you will have almost a first line financial crime team making sure that the nature and purpose with which the customer conducts their business remains consistent with how you introduce them to the group. And if you want, and this is a really point of discussion at the moment that I find day to day with our customers, legacy providers that have been in providing that screening or financial crime solution for a long time, they absolutely provided a service and a value add to the group. But as AI comes to the fore much more, and you need to bring automation and you need to bring agentic approaches to workflow and making sure that the operational conundrum is cracked. If you have a deployed on-prem solution for financial crime and you bring in a layer above it to do some sort of orchestration, there becomes a challenge then when the regulator comes in and says, show me your models, show me how your AI from the bottom up give you coverage from matching, from list management, from data aggregation, which ultimately then put your workflow in a scenario where an automated decision was at least being presented to an analyst for review. So we're seeing that the regulator right now is saying if they're not getting that transparency, if there's no real clear action as to where the matching engine produced the output, that's where the discrepancy is starting to come. So most of the institutions of that scale and of that complexity are saying, well, we would rather have a single provider to do integration with the list providers, do our secondary scoring, do our matching, do our alert handling, and ultimately then if we need to report to the regulator, whether there be agentic AI or LLM in the mix, we've got consistency from start to finish. And if you don't have that, unfortunately, at the moment, the regulators are saying, well, you need to show it to us. Otherwise, you're going to have to continue to work the way it was. And the way it was, unfortunately, is just really inefficient. Again, really confusing and really challenging for a lot of these customers. But if the KYC, KYB is cracked and it's in a good condition, your financial crime scenario, if you want to bring some automation and some straight through processing and some of the new ways of working, it's probably better to do it from the ground up as opposed to try and bring something into the middle. It just adds a different level of complexity to the agenda.
Yeah, and that's just understanding the landscape between them, all those providers is important too. So when it started, we had the list data providers, right? The list data, and they were actually most of them sprung out of like journalists, right? They were founding these companies where they were building lists. And they were data providers, data aggregators, and they were terrible at technology, right? They just did lists. So what sprung up is this whole industry of companies that took their list and turned it into a screening application, right? So you would have buy the list, and then you had to buy smart banking systems, right? Which is, serve some of the big companies. And what they did is they took the list, they took your clients, they compared a match, they kept it up to date. And there's actually a lot of complexity, as Kevin knows, in that process of just comparing lists, making sure you're giving up to date, and then name matching, right? There's a lot of value in that process. And that's where a lot of things kind of get glossed over. But even just the name matching rules, alerting, thresholds, all of that kind of thing is an art, really. It's more of a science. So then people were buying these two systems. They had the data providers, and then they had the screening provider. What happened then is the screening providers or the data providers did start rolling out their own solutions in-house where you could go directly to one of the big providers, and they had some minimal screening providers. They were still terrible at technology, but at least you went to one person, right? Or one company. They've gotten slightly better, but they're all still pretty bad, honestly, at because that's not their bread and butter, right? So people will go to a Kevin or a Napier or another company. What I'm interested in knowing, and I don't know, is it's bifurcated now, really, and it's been that way in big banks. Smaller companies will have one provider that does everything, but will it split again? And will there be another division of companies that are AI companies that sit on top of the stack? And we're starting to see that a little bit. Like I've always taken the opinion, I want to be like everything, right? So we do the data, we do the platform, and we do the AI on top of it. But that's not the way a lot of companies buy, right? Because they already have technical infrastructure that is locked into something, and it's easier to be additive than to replace something. But that's the question. Will there just be pure AI companies now that say, we have a data, we have screening companies, and we have AI that does adjudication and all these things that AI can do? Or is it going to be looped into one? Or is the screening companies and the AI companies going to converge, and then you have data coming into those? Or is these companies going to start also making the data because they can with AI and doing different things? So that's the way it's going. But Kevin's reply was right. That's just the interesting way to think about how these things are related. And there's very, very few true AI companies at this point. And I've fought AI for like the word AI forever, right? I was always against it, but I've succumbed to the crowds. I just call it AI. But what I specifically mean is large language models, right?
Yeah.
And are large language models on top of it. And I'm making this prediction now for 2 years, and it's starting to come true. But I think within the next now, I was saying 5 years, 2 years ago. So the next 3 years, almost every screening solution is going to have an AI layer at the end of it, because the benefits are just so good. Like when Kevin mentioned that secondary layer, that's required, and still most companies don't, or banks don't do that for whatever reason. It blows your mind. Like you have this information, you're doing a name match, and then you're reviewing everything. Compare it to the secondary information deterministically, not even using like LLMs. why hasn't everyone been doing this for the last 20 years? But for whatever reason, they haven't been, right? So that's value. So you kind of have the name matching, secondary layer, and then adding that AI agent that kind of does almost an AI adjudication of that level one. Without exaggeration, it cuts things that you have to look at 90% if you implement it right.
Yeah.
And it is incredible. And all the years of doing it, I haven't seen anything that solves the heart of the problem as much as people want, which is false positives. Right? We talk about false negatives because it's interesting and missing information. But if you ask anyone in banking or who has to look at alerts, almost always the complaint is too many results to look at. And this is actually comes very close to solving it to a degree that we've never seen before.
Well, that's so relevant. Genuinely, on a day-to-day basis, I have these conversations with customers who believe that certain providers coming in are giving them AI, and then we take them through what is the next gen approach that Napier would take to doing customer name screening or sanction screening. And like the first box for us, we segment it in such a way where we want to reduce the noise and become more accurate and create that efficiency. First things first, which we've been talking about here, would be on the list management and the data providers. You know, how do you segregate those lists? Make sure you're only matching against what you want to see. That in itself, Christian, which you know, will reduce at stage one so much of the noise. Second to that, what we do then is we would have multi-configurations within the screening. So if I'm a UK headquartered bank, and I have a part of the business in Ireland, part of the business in Spain, part of the business in Germany, you know, the criteria for each one of those different geographies may be different. So don't have the same configuration for everything for lists. Let's segment it in such a way where, again, depending on the operational impact, you're getting more accuracy coming through from the matching. It's usually only at that point we go into the algorithms within the name matching engine and say, well, for those Hispanic names, what do you want to see? What's a non-negotiable? How do we make sure that the accuracy of the name matching reflects the segmented unit or the multi-configuration element that you have within the platform? The next step then would be that secondary scoring and making sure that there's auto alert discounting. We've done the matching, you know, we've configured the lists, we've given you some level of configuration in the geography. Now let's use the secondary scoring to mitigate and reduce what should be a direct match for a customer name. And at that point, this is the scary thing about it, at that point, we're only bringing in our AI advisor. So realistically, working on that particular lineage, we reduce the amount of noise to the tune of about 80 to 90%. Yeah. Whereas if you're working on a legacy platform, as you just articulated really well, it's just so much noise, so much nonsense, and a big waste of time. So they would be the tactical approaches and levers that we would bring to customers currently in the market. And as I say, that AI advisor that we have within the Napier solution, it probably attunes to about 10 or 15% of the true edge cases that are risky. And typically you want to get into the second line as quickly as possible.
Thank you. Great insight so far. Just to tap further into what we're saying. So false positive reduction, right? So when I speak to a lot of banks, there's a fatigue with certain clients that they have that on a daily produce hundreds of alerts and red flags and things of that sort. Currently, how is Napier dealing with that to reduce that, of course, and is it using AI? And then another question I had for Christian is the use of AI itself. Or is your LLM building profiles? So is it trying to understand who Arslan is and then working forward from there? Or is it just trying to match anything it can find on the internet to an Arslan Abbasi? If that makes sense. Will it create an idea of an Arslan and try to find who this person is online? Or will it just find the name Arslan Abbasi and just get you whatever details? So, Kevin, if you don't mind going first with your point, and then Christian.
No, I know you dropped there ever so quickly, but I pretty much talked Christian through that approach to reducing the false positives. So, just to recap, essentially what we would do from a customer name screening. The first segment we look at would be, list management, data management, making sure that the data quality and the list being reviewed are appropriate. And they match whatever the institution needs to get to in order to stay compliant. Then we would go through a multi-configuration approach depending on the geographies or the business types, the different products, if it's retail banking versus capital markets versus corporates, making sure that the segmentation for each of the units within an institution is reflective of their customer segments as opposed to just being a blanket approach to screening. So data management, list management, multi-configuration, At that point, then we go in and we go through a tuning exercise on the name matching. So the name matching engine is very, very precise, and it comes with a certain amount of precision to match. But moreover than that, if you're finding that you service a customer in Portugal or Spain, is there some nuance that exists within Hispanic names that you may not typically see in Irish names or UK names? So we'll go to that level of detail with a customer before then actually going into what would be the secondary scoring. So at that point, the lists have been managed, the multi-configurations have been established, the matching engine has been tuned to make sure that the accuracy on the match is appropriate. At that point, then we're only bringing in the secondary scoring against the customer reference data and the KYC to make sure that if the information already held and is clean, compliant data, we will match that against the name hit, and then we will use auto alert discounting to remove that false positive and that noise from the system. And as I've explained to Christian there, it's only beyond that, which we see to be about 10, maybe 15% of the edge cases, that we bring in our AI advisor to provide some level of insight, direction, or steer to the analyst saying, okay, Kevin McGuinness, we can see that based on the list, based on the configuration, based on the name matching, based on the KYC that we back tested, this should be a direct hit, and you need to bring it into your compliance officer as quickly as possible. You would be really surprised. This to me seems logical. It's a very good operating model. Our platform is established in such a way to give customers that flexibility and that functionality. But Christian said it very well earlier. A lot of customers still aren't working that way. You know, they're using legacy technology, they're using outdated processes, and unfortunately, that is going to crush you. Before you bring AI to the table, you need to really define your operating model to, you know, get your accuracy, and then look at AI to give you some level of efficiency. So just wanted to recap. I'd sort of gone down that a second ago, but Christian, that's fundamentally what we're seeing in the market and how we've designed the product to meet the customer needs.
Yeah, that's the right way to do it. Despite running an AI company, I try to use AI as little as possible whenever I can. It's not a bad way, right? It has its purposes, but yeah, you want to do anything deterministically that you can first. It takes less resources, you can explain it. AI has this whole class of problems that's really good at solving, and that's messy problems in the world, because the world is messy and information is fuzzy and not clear, and that's where AI fits in. But there's kind of this so much low-hanging fruit in the screening world where you're taking things and deterministically removing results before you get to that last mile of adding AI, and that's the right approach. I do wonder, and I'm sure with this and everything with AI, is we're probably going to lose some of that art of years of tuning as newer companies come in and they're like, okay, yeah, we don't know any of this, we didn't go through any of this hardship, let's just throw an LLM at the last problem, right? And that's probably what's going to happen, and it's going to change things. I actually think with this, and I could be completely wrong, but I think with this and really everything with AI, we're almost at the sweet spot of life of having like lots of really good experience and then having this great tool where we compare them together. And we haven't lost that knowledge yet that we've ordered. But that is probably outside of this conversation.
No, it's a good point.
To your question though, yes, context. So that's exactly what we do, and that's where AI fits in, right? And the disambiguation. False positives are funny because false positives are almost a completely self-made problem, in that we go out of our way to do fuzzy matching to find more things, right? And you hate getting a miss. Nobody wants to miss a sanction match. Nobody wants these things. So for years we've just said, let's add alias tables. So Tom and Thomas. Let's add more fuzzy matching. Let's do more and more and more. And we've done that, and that's great. And we have better recall. But you get a lot of false positives then. So like we designed this false positive problem because of this fuzzy matching expansion. And then you bring that back in now with the different secondary matching and the different AI, and we're able to do that, and now actually not give you too many results. But the biggest challenge is for human research and for machine research, disambiguation on names. It's the number one problem. Two people with the same name, how do you find the right information for them? And the only way to do that is with context. If you only have names, you can't do it. You need information on both sides, on the data sources itself and the subjects that you're looking up. And if you have that information, now you're able to a really high degree get that you're researching the right person in an automated way. And we were never able to do that before. And things you're looking at: locations, contacts, professions, affiliated people, right? We build entity graphs of like relationships, and we could say, okay, there's a number of overlapping relationships, and it's the same name, it's probably the same person, and we could score all that. And again, even that scoring, like we might use AI to build those entity graphs, but then we can deterministically score the relationships. So AI is like great, but a lot of things are still traditional software engineering and traditional things that we've done. It's just the AI enhances certain components of it when it's kind of sprinkled in the right way. I feel like there's another question where I don't know where else going.
Just on that, I feel like you can fish a fish with laser, or you can use a net, right? A net is a classic thing. It just adds that extra filter for you, and you still need those nets in there in your embedded systems to catch them. Talk to me about pricing, because that's one issue, and I I just wanted to ask both of you this: how do you feel about agents in the future, AI agents? So if I'm a bank, I have 500 to 1,000 employees on AML screening, which some of them do, by the way. I could reduce that down to maybe 10, 20 staff through the use of AI agents. And then through my own AI agents and creation of my own kind of SaaS in-house, I don't have to pay a third party millions. I mean, how much am I saving on the ongoing monitoring and the daily screening checks? Probably a lot, right? So do you see big banks, big companies, more enterprise level accounts creating their own army of agents, their own tapping to Dow Jones themselves and then filtering that themselves? Or do you still see them for the next 10 years relying on SaaS companies, actually the experts in this area, tech companies?
So I have a war on how I have a war on AI. I have the war on the word agents, right? And this is another one I'm losing, and I'm gonna lose it. And I'm saying just everything is an agent that uses AI now. But historically, I have this whole like diatribe I've written in my blog about AI agents. Historically, nobody was doing true agents, which true agentic AI was. We have an AI that uses a tool and then makes decisions in a loop, right? So it's like, here's a name, I have access to a web search, I have access to this database, and I'm going to know my task, make decisions, and then come out with an output. Despite everyone saying they're doing that, it's starting to change slightly. Nobody's really doing it. And nobody's really doing it because it's super unpredictable, the outcome. Like it might work 60% of the time, but it might completely fail and give you things you have no idea what happens some percent of the time. So when companies are saying agents, usually what they really mean is workflow, which is some kind of structured orchestration of we're using AI, but it's going to follow a known path. It's going to search this data set. It's going to do this, and it's almost going to be a deterministic path. And again, this might be a distinction that nobody in the world cares about, and it doesn't matter. But there is like a distinction. So everyone says like, most companies say we use agents. It's like AI washing, right? Really, they're just using best case scenario. They're using an LLM. Worst case scenario, they're doing the same thing they've been doing for 10 years, and they're just calling it machine learning agents and trying to trick people. So having said that, it's very difficult to get that right because it's not, when we think about models, especially in screening models, they were so limited and they were so closed scope. Like, okay, what's your name matching model, right? You can't look at a LLM, especially a frontier, large, like from a big provider, and audit that the same way you did a traditional model, right? They're black boxes. We don't know what happens. But what you can do is you can audit the process that they're in end to end. And that's why you really need that workflow. You can look at the inputs, you can look at the outputs and determine the predictability. But that system to build is extremely complicated. And it takes a lot of testing. And almost no banks are going to be able to do it on their own in-house. You might see the mega banks, the very largest banks in the world who like to build things in-house and have a team. They might be able to staff project teams internally, like, the JP Morgan, the Citibank, banks like that. They may be able to bring a solution that's home built using off-the-shelf components to work. And I expect them to do it, but almost everyone else, I don't expect to do it. I expect they really need something that just works out of the box and is explainable. And for the near term, that's what we're going to see, right? It's just too much. It's too complicated to build the system and get it right at scale and explainable to expect anyone who doesn't do that for a living to do today.
Yeah. I couldn't have said it any better. And that's the sentiment coming from the market. Even the tier ones, or some of the large insurance firms, or gaming and casinos, or even some of the government entities, I mean, if you're screening 50, 60 million individuals on a daily basis, and you're going to rely on some level of agentic work, bot to give you an outcome, it's simply not going to work. So in many ways, there's a demand from the market to consolidate the screening agenda, from start to finish. We're increasingly being asked to bring some level. We always have the LLM switched on. So as the analysts within the institutions are working through, they've done their checks, the secondary scoring's been matched. We will have AI running in the background, which will predetermine an outcome, no question. But at the moment, the institutions are going through with their operational teams and working that. Once we're really into a rhythm of getting refinement and accuracy on the flow, yes, there is a demand that says, could you bring some level of agentic processing to your workflow? But it won't be standalone. It'll be fully integrated into the list management approach, the secondary scoring, into the fuzzy matching engine. So there's an enriched data set that gives you the outcome or the potential outcome, which is fundamentally being back tested and checked and validated against the engine. And at that point, then, if you can bring an output that tells you can auto discount an alert, well, if the system is so foolproof and brought you to the point in time where you have confidence in the accuracy, the efficiency in itself will be even a human being going in, doing a quick glance review and marking that as being compliant. Or dare I say it, if it's one that's been escalated, getting it into the right people to have a review that is non-compliant. But to Christian's point, there's certainly nobody knocking down our door, and nor would we do it as a point of reference. I should just make that point. Constantly in the market, I get approached and said, could we have your AI layer to plug into our existing platform to give us more accuracy and more direction in terms of how we should be resolved? It's like, no, it doesn't work that way. We need to have the Napier engine, the list management. We need to have that consolidated flow as to how you want to operate and manage your approach to sanction screening or PEP screening or adverse media. And at the end, then you get the true benefit from auto discounting or some level of automated alert management. But definitely not just take our AI and plug it in on something else, because it would cause more problems and there'd be a transparency issue, and it just wouldn't give the output that the tier one banks typically would want to see. So it's consolidated enterprise platform as a service, software as a service, as opposed to just a sticking plaster being put in for pure augmentation.
Great, thank you for that. Quick questions for you guys. I'm curious, what are the main differences between you guys and your competition, right? So as a company, what is the key differentiator of Napier AI, for instance? Not necessarily LSEG or WorldTrek, not these competitors, but more like Comply Advantage, more companies that are selling direct as aggregators. And as well for you, Christian, more on the generative AI due diligence kind of world. Where do you guys differ? So yeah, both of you, if you could just add something.
Yeah, look, I'll give 30 seconds. Appreciate we're close to time here. From Napier's perspective, we only deploy compliance first AI. We work very closely with the FCA, the regulator in the UK. We've deployed our software in for market participants to come in and try and use the sandbox, which we have available, to break the system and understand where the true risks exist. I think, one, we're consolidated in making sure that the accuracy the Napier engine platform and workflow provides is regulatory approved. And second to that, it's the scale. I mean, some of our tier one customers are processing close to 100 million names every night. And we work that on a delta capacity to make sure that we're accurate on their behalf. So compliance first approach to AI, to workflow, to reporting, and ultimately then the ability to scale and allow customers to have confidence that their compliance services can scale with their needs. And that's essentially what Napier brings to the market and how we continue to service and capture market demand.
I would say the biggest differentiator with us, and there's not very many companies even close to this space that are using kind of generative AI to automate research, right? That's essentially what we're doing. We're automating research at scale. But the core differentiator is, even though we're a young company, we've been doing this for longer than literally anybody, right? We have been in the generative AI space. We started with LLMs at the core. We didn't patch them on as an afterthought. So just there's an amount of experience you get when working with this kind of technology that there's no shortcut to, right? It's just time and space, building things, seeing real world experience. And we've been doing it for longer. And then even before this company, we've just been doing it even longer than that. So just to be this kind of this really deep experience And I'll be the first to tell you whether the solution will work or won't work for you, or if it solves your needs or not. And a lot of that is because people will email me, and I want them to email me with happy emails and not emails that something didn't work. Right? So that's another big differentiator, especially the bigger data providers. We just had a case where there was a list. There was some Norwegian like ESG type list of companies. They were working with one of the bigger data providers. They were going back and forth with this data provider for 6 months, whether they could add this list, whether they couldn't add this list. They emailed me and said, hey, there's this list. We think it's good. I looked at it. It was a good list. The next day, we just consumed it and put it in the database. So like you get that level of kind of boutique support that is really the benefit of going with a smaller company sometimes, right? That's why you can email me. I know the answer. You're not going, most of the time you work with a larger company, the person your contact might not be there in 6 months. They're not invested. We're 100% invested. And it's hard to explain that unless you like experience it in the thing.
Just on that then, because you guys sell to kind of different size and different style of companies, right?
Yeah.
So Kevin, talk to me about the size and pricing and the industries, and similarly, Christian, if you could talk to me about size, pricing, and which industries are you targeting?
Christian, you can go first on that particular one off the back of your last answer, which was a great answer, by the way. I like that.
So we started when I launched selling directly to due diligence firms, interestingly enough. And they're the toughest buyer because they research for a living. They're extremely opinionated on what they're able to find, and they're knowledgeable in tools. So they were our core buyer, and they saw it and they said, there's something there. So the fact that they saw value, that was kind of the biggest indicator. But since then, we're API first, where we have a platform, but most of our consumers are API. So other tech platforms consume our API, and they basically have a deployable AI screening tool in their application. They don't have to build it from scratch. So other tech platforms in the third-party risk space, and now just by word of mouth, we've started getting into banks, which is I've avoided because that was my last company, but they've been coming back. So now we've been working with larger scale banks and research and due diligence groups as well. So we literally sell across the board. But pricing wise is based on if you're going to be a user of the application, it's per seat. If you're based on the API, it's just volume based, and that's nice. And it's locked into real costs that makes sense, right? We pay X, this is what we charge, and it scales with volume. So it's not like some made up hand wavy pricing. Everything is grounded in reality.
Yeah. Yeah, look, almost the same. From an Napier perspective, our market segment is quite diversified. We cover banks, we cover gaming and casinos, we do fund administration and asset management, we do insurance companies, and there's a host of others that we would service. Specifically on the name screening front, to screen a customer is the same, largely speaking. So therefore, all of those segments will get the same level of expertise and the same output. Some nuance, obviously, whenever we go in to do payment screening or transaction monitoring, there's certainly a high degree of complexity that comes with the AML transaction monitoring. But similar to Christian and his company, we price based on scale. So if you're a mid-market participant and you have 400,000 unique customers and you want to screen them using the sophistication and all of the precision that comes with Napier, that's fine, because we pay out to host, we pay out to scale, and therefore that'll be reflected in the pricing. Likewise, if you go to some of our larger customers who may have 50 million unique customers on their books, that's fine, because the scale will give them the ability to have the same output. It'll just cost more because of the processing requirements. We don't have a price cap per user. So if you are a big tier one and you've got 400 operational users, that's fine. There'll be no additional cost for that because it's the processing element that takes the most consideration. And yeah, like everything, it's we're coming up with new ways of working. If a customer can see the true benefit in the platform and we can be confident that we're going to reduce their false positives and give them operational efficiency, we do have the ability then to contract and underwrite that particular outcome over maybe a 5 or 7 year period. So yeah, horses for courses in many regards, but that's ultimately where we're operating at the moment.
Fabulous, fabulous. Thank you so much, both of you. We're going to move on to our second panel, where we're going to be talking to the providers of platformers that use tools like yours as add-ons to theirs. So thank you again, guys. Get in touch with Kevin, get in touch with Christian. Napier AI, fantastic tool. Threat.Digital, generative AI, due diligence, excellent tool. I've seen both myself. I think they're excellent. So yeah, get in touch with them, and thank you both for being here.
Thank you very much. Christian, nice to meet you.
You too, Kevin.
Take care, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. So now, guys, we're going to bring in Johnny, Klaus. Hello there, Johnny. Hello there, Ruth, James, and Harriet. So a lot more people just suddenly showed up. Thank you, guys, for attending. How are we all?
All good.
Yeah,
Excellent.
Good,
Fabulous, fabulous. So we'll have a few more people joining, but just like to give you guys an intro. Again, our audience, a little intro of what's going on as well. We are doing a Regtech roundtable on the topic of screening. We just had Napier AI and a few other screening providers on for the first panel. They talked about how they get data, the watch list, the sanctions list, adverse media, the price points, the difference points of all of that. But here we have a list and collection of vendors who actually add these tools to their platform as well. You guys have tons of experience individually, so in this sector. So what I'd like to do is just go through the room, get everybody to introduce themselves. Why don't we start with Johnny? You showed up first, so Johnny, and then Klaus, and then Ruth, and then James, and I'll shout your names. But yeah, go ahead, Johnny.
Hi there, Arslan. Nice to see you. It's been a while. Hi, I'm Johnny Davis. So I'm in charge of sales and channel here at Zenoo. Bit of briefly on the business. Our background is in white label. We're a predominantly tech-driven business. Our role is to orchestrate and deliver a full compliance ecosystem to our partners and customers. And yeah, delighted to be joining here today. Thank you for inviting me.
Klaus, love to hear from you. Klaus, are you there? He's a bit still for me, so Ruth, we'll go with you until Klaus returns.
Sure. Thank you for having me today, and hi everyone on the panel. So my name is Ruth Mittelman-Cohen, and I'm the head of legal compliance at VinciWorks. So I lead our work with UK and global law firms. VinciWorks is a global leader in anti-money laundering training and compliance solutions. And we have onboarding software, as you said, that integrates with lots of other pieces of software as well. And it's nice to be here with everyone.
Thank you. Good to see you, Ruth, and I hope you, family, everybody's doing well. We'll talk on that
Thank
separately.
you.
Klaus, love to hear from you. How you been, and tell us about you.
I'm very well. It's busy time these days, as I think that's for everybody. Technology is accelerating so much, and things are moving so fast these days that it's that's interesting to stay in touch with all the new developments. So my name is Klaus Christensen. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Know Your Customer Limited. We're a Hong Kong headquartered company, but we're worldwide active. We concentrate on the business verification, so KYB rather than KYC. And we have a global leader in live registry connections as a data source for the whole system to decide on onboarding specifically. We work with a lot of large banks like DBS and Standard Chartered, especially in Asia, but also in Europe and beyond.
Thank you for that. And sorry, James, would you like to go next? Tell us about Diligencia yourself as well.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for inviting me to join the panel, and it's great to meet the other panelists and looking forward to the discussion. I'm James Redfern. I'm the Director of Sales here at Diligencia, based in the UK. For reasons that will become obvious when I explain what we do, we're kind of busy. We at Diligencia provide due diligence and corporate intelligence services across organizations and people in the Middle East and Africa. And we supply these to corporates, financial services, law firms, public sector, etc. So we've got a broad range of clients who use our services. We're predominantly, you can look at us as predominantly a data supplier. The perspective I want to bring to this discussion is very much one of a regional specialist that works in emerging and challenging jurisdictions. And the premise that I'm going to probably repeat repeatedly through the conversation is the need for accurate information and context around, understanding who your client is, because no screening solution is going to be any good if you start with the wrong sort of core information. But that's it. I've been in this business for longer than I care to remember.
Thank you for that. And then Harriet, would you like to go next? Tell us about you, Thirdfort.
Yeah, cool. Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to the conversation. It's always good to have a round table. I'm Harriet. I work for Thirdfort. My role at Thirdfort is AML enablement. Before joining Thirdfort, I held different roles in-house. So
quite a unique perspective that I can bring to Thirdfort. And in regards to Thirdfort, we are a UK-based platform that helps regulated businesses verify, identify source of funds, conduct AML checks, with the aim against protecting against fraud and money laundering, and really improving the client onboarding experience more generally. And we do that in many different ways, but one of our uniques is to bring together different data suppliers under one umbrella where people might not have the ability to connect with them all individually. And we like to bring the best in class data suppliers within the Thirdfort output, so that hopefully clients can access the most accurate and reliable data that they can.
Sweet, thank you. That was succinct. And Thirdfort specialist in law, property, doing really well in that front. So, Leonie, talk to us about you and SIMUR and what you guys are up to.
Hi, everybody. Lovely to meet some of the panelists I haven't already met. My name's Leonie Tabor. I'm Head of Risk and Compliance at SIMUR. We are a global KYC, KYB tool with end-to-end capabilities, including screening, risk assessment. Our USP is that we are engaging in the digital wallet space, digital EID space. So we're developing product capability in that area. My background is in banking compliance, so I have a vast amount of experience with different screening tools and calibrating and tuning those, and all the hidden difficulties that can arise, which you don't anticipate when you're sitting in the seat as head of compliance of a bank. So yeah, looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you as well. Tracy, would you like to tell us about you and your company?
Sure. Thank you very much, Aslin. So I am Tracy Longbottom, co-founder and head of sales at Forsyte. We are a relatively new entrant into the UK legal space. So we predominantly, or exclusively actually at the moment, service UK law firms. Really, we're positioned as a risk management platform. Underpinning that is a really robust client matter risk assessment process, but really we are AI driven. So we collate data, screening data is one portion of what we do to help decision making on risk much more easy. So thank you ever so much. Great group of people. Thanks for being invited.
No problem. And Amy, tell us about you, Flagright, and everything about that.
Thanks, and thanks for inviting me. My name's Amy Cleal. I'm the Commercial Director for UK and Europe based out of London. We do operate globally though, and our customers include UniCredit, Go Cardless and Intuit. Flagright is a financial crime operating system which enables no-code transaction monitoring, watchlist screening, customer risk assessment, and we also support our customers streamline investigations through our AI native centralized case management module.
Great. Thank you all. So as you can see, we have a very good range of people, range of experience and different industries being sold to. It's really important for this panel to get a diverse cluster of providers. So we have Flagright covering transaction monitoring, actually monitoring the payments, counterparty screening. Diligencia, I believe, provides a really good kind of a coverage for really hard jurisdictions and provides that KYB screening. Know your customer provides the exact accuracy of the direct registry data, so you could always rely on that. And then you have platformers like OmniTrack, like SIMUR, like Forsyte, and Zenoo that bring all of that together and house it into one area. So I'd like to kind of go through some kind of big headline topics that have been bothering me and give me the reason to set this up. I'm personally finding that the old databases, the Dow Jones of the world, the Experience, and the companies that tap into them are missing out on a lot of data, particularly risk data, that is either on the web, or it's in court records, or it's in different languages, or that it goes past 20-year limits. And some of these companies have 10-year limits on their data range. So with that being said, has anybody else noticed this? And when procuring data from your sides, what were you looking for originally? Were you looking at Comply Advantage, Dow Jones, Experian? What were you looking for? And anyone can just go for it, basically.
Aslan, I'll start. I'll remove ourselves from this particular topic of conversation because we're in the business of going directly to official registries and official sources of content, or government sources of content, chambers of commerce, official gazettes, the registries. So we're not reliant on any of the major vendors or aggregators as a source of content, which we would then put back into a screening tool, for example. So we're about originating content from what I call the official sources, and we can discuss that later, I'm sure. But in that respect, I'm not sure I'm best placed to answer your specific question.
I mean, I could come in quickly on just as I said in my intro, my experience of compared probably almost most of the major tools on the market, LexisNexis, RiskScreen, World Compliance, and actually delved into, and this is exactly what I meant in my intro, actually delved into the data feeds, where they come from, Factiva, Dow Jones, whatever list they're using, how far whether they are doing web scraping or data scraping from websites, which gives you a much less detailed and rigorous search parameter to draw from, whether they license content from media suppliers. And there's a vast range, you're right, Arsalan, in terms of what they do and how far they go back. I think as end users, we think that they are conclusive, and they're really not. And particularly, I'm at the moment in the Cayman Islands, I have been for a while, servicing smaller jurisdictions, and local news media was a gap we found when I was working as head of compliance at a local retail bank. They were not tapping in correctly to local news media to get us the information on our customers. So we could be screening against 5 tools, but they weren't catching our market. So I think it is a really pertinent issue. And I think for all of us who are engaged either in plug and play scenarios with different screening tools, or developing our own, or engaging with these providers, it's critical you do the due diligence to understand exactly what's being supplied in terms of licensed content, in terms of how they're obtaining the information, in terms of how far back they're going, which newspapers. And I had schedules about which major newspapers in which jurisdictions are covered, and then you're tuning in calibration on top of that. Are you switching on and off different jurisdictions, and why? And of course, if you're an end user, the methodology around that decision making is critical. But I'll let someone else jump in.
I think. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say something, Tracy, and I'll be interested to hear what you think and what Harriet thinks. We're all in kind of the legal space here. But what we're seeing from our law firm, UK legal clients especially, is that they're often taking more than one provider to carry out these checks. So they're feeling that there are specific niches that different providers are giving them. But they're saying it's okay, we can have 3 or 4 different providers to ensure that we're getting the full picture of everything we need to do. And I think that's something that we've seen kind of evolve, especially in the last couple of years. I think previously it was you're going to pick one provider and they'll do everything. And I think now we're seeing that there is room for different providers to be combining together. And so generally in terms of kind of systems, like we have an omni-track system, we have APIs often with 3 or 4 different providers in order to provide the full set of results. Sorry, Tracy, I'll hand back to you now.
No, don't apologise. It's actually very much in line with what I was going to say. I think the screening space has evolved very much like the identity space, in that people thought like there was a catch-all for everything, and even that's quite nuanced now. So I often speak to firms that might use like Infotrack for property, and they might use another vendor like Thirdfort for corporate, as an example, and they're quite selective in the needs not only of the underlying data provider, but what the layer on top of that offers. So if you look at somebody like a Zapier and a legal, and probably many others on here, they will use Comply Advantage as their underlying source, and will probably have one. And I think probably 5 years ago, law firms were just taking for granted that would be a catch-all, that would do everything. And actually in previous roles, I was constantly taking calls to say, well, you missed this PEP, or you missed this adverse media check. And we're like, well, it's a scaling issue for us as tech vendors, because we can't be all things to all people. It's the 80-20 rule. We can capture most things and we can do most things, but we can't be all things to all people. So it's very much in line actually with your view on that, is that it's the communication to your client about what you're actually getting for that. And it's a challenging sales message, right? To say we can get most of them, we're not going to get all of them. And it's, yeah, Klaus is nodding, but that's the reality as a tech scale up. Of you will never, even if you had 9 out of 10 providers, you would not capture everything. And that's the difficulty. To Leonie's point, if you're looking for some niche adverse media in a very niche jurisdiction, it's not going to happen with most of the big tech providers.
I think I would just continue to run with that a little bit and say around we're all responsible as well for keeping, like I said at the start, we have lots of suppliers that come together, and making sure that we stay on top of our suppliers as much as our clients stay on top of us, and making sure that we're asking the right questions of them. And obviously, if we're seeing that noise come up from our clients and consumers, holding our suppliers to account for that as well. And actually, quite quickly, you can outgrow a supplier. As that might sound quite mean, but as a tech startup and been around a little while, you might have had a supplier in at the start, and actually as you grow and evolve and your clients change and that demographic change and that need changes and that regulation expectation changes as well, the need to constantly keep that under review and keep that conversation kind of going and open with them and thinking about what it is that's not working. And now AI is a real buzz topic and everybody loves AI and things, but actually one of the things that I certainly noticed is that where a supplier is very AI driven and there's no human touch in that train, actually that can cause quite a frustration. So thinking about, is there another supplier on the market who potentially has that AI element to it, but then also has that human touch? And so I think we've got that joint responsibility when we're taking on such an important thing such as screening for our clients, where the risks of missing something is particularly high, to hold ourselves to a high bar of accountability and make sure that we're constantly reviewing and thinking about where it's missing, where it's gaps, and that we're transparent about that as wherever possible with clients, so that they have the opportunity to look at the market and find other things that fit, or we can do the same actually on their behalf. And actually there might be a growth opportunity within one of our platforms where we can leverage something more specific and more unique.
I think I would just follow on, Harriet, from what you've said there. Firstly, to reflect on the initial part of the conversation, we work in collaboration with many of the large data providers that you've mentioned. And from our experience, the clients are typically quite satisfied with the data that they're receiving, but not the level of configurations that can be provided through the platform. So having a solution like ours enables them to, on a no-code basis, configure different screening profiles for different products or geographies, like Leonie was saying. And then secondly, a very limited user interface for investigations. And this obviously causes a lot of manual review, headache, very large false positive rates, etc. And agentic AI is extremely useful for this. However, as Harriet mentioned, it really needs to be monitored with a human in the loop process, and very strict guardrails on what decisions AI agents can take and what they can't take, aligned to that organization's SOPs and risk appetite.
So I think I have to be careful. We're agnostic as Zenoo, so we don't necessarily have a similar, right, Amy? But I have to be also careful because I'm in Compliant Advantage's offices at the moment, and they do
I love that, full disclosure.
But I'm in an enclosed booth and they can't get at me. So we work with like some of the other colleagues in our same space, Lexus and LSEG and GBG, and these guys resell our solution and our technology. I think the big thing for me is it's easy to have a knock at these data services. They're not a precise science, but to throw poorly collected, poorly maintained identity data that's going to be used for those screenings and then not do anything about it as those constant false positives are happening, that's where I think the AI has some function, has some improvement. We've tried, we've been testing and working on AI for the last couple of years. What we found is we've ended up with 11 distinct agents doing different tasks, 3 of which are adversarial. So 3 of which are kind of the red team fighting against the blue team. And obviously being Zenoo, we've given them all personal names and whatever. But what we found in that is we can do some A/B testing across different vendors. So if you're able to orchestrate and actually quickly integrate and almost do a beauty pageant on the range of different data services, it's often the ones that don't necessarily have the big marketing budgets. I'm not saying big marketing budget means an illusory conversion rate, but when you start to see the data conversion in it, you very quickly see those who are more technically driven and aren't necessarily a recognized brand always, but have really spent the time to clean that data, who are a group I met through you, Arslan, like the guys at Asia Verify, really brilliant data sets, just no one's ever heard of them. right? So whereas everybody's heard of Lexus, but we know, like all the big aggregators, they have an onion of data. It is multi-layered. It is supplied from all different places. Adverse media scares the hell out of me personally, because I think you can get an entry, and media is now adversarial, not just adverse, right? So from 1990s when it was implemented to where we are now, media and mainstream media is affected by social media. That's really scary, because if you've got a court reporter coming out of, putting something on Twitter about results of someone having a bankruptcy, and that gets into mainstream media, how do you get it out? There are no systems to be able to remove it. But yes, so not to ask the question, gone off on a slight tangent, but what we see from an A/B testing point of view is gives the customer the opportunity to potentially improve their data as well as choose the right service provider.
So to complete the circle, I say some words as well. Even though we are agnostic as well, so we have multiple screening providers plugged in, and it's not usually our position to tell customers. We resell some for smaller customers, and then that's the only choice really for them. But the large customers all have their own ideas. And I wonder really about two things. Like I now got, thanks for ladies' initial responses immediately, that challenge here. It is not that simple actually to make a good choice here. And even to make a choice might not be the right thing. You should probably work with multiple. Because they all say, oh, we're the best in class data. We have the biggest coverage. And these are all interchangeable. So it's kind of hard. I wonder about two things, really. One, what did you see was the effect of this incredible acceleration of the rate of change in sanctions after the Ukraine war started? And it's like now even more so. And what do you see as the impact of AI there? That's also interesting for me. I mean, we use a lot of it. We have our own solutions, and the team uses a lot, and I use a lot. But what does it mean for screening? I'd love to hear a bit more about it. But these two things really, what did the acceleration in sanctions change your choices there? Would be my first thing.
To pick up just quickly on what you just said, Klaus, but also what Johnny said, I think sanctions is one of the easy parts, because the data provided on a static list is pretty comprehensive. But I think we have to remember we're matching two data sets, exactly as Johnny's point. As I always say this, your organization's data must be clean in order to be able to match against the list of potential prospects that you're comparing to, and it's matching those two sides that's critical. Adverse for me, exactly as Johnny said, is the difficulty. It is trying to pinpoint accurate adverse that's targeted to your specific considerations as an institution or a platform. I mean, I've looked at and trying to be all things to all men again, to pick up on Johnny's point. Providers that give you kind of environmental fines for various organizations, is that really relevant in our it could be relevant to a very niche subset of our client base, but across the board, is that going to be critical for people to know? It is hard to determine for adverse, and I don't think any of the providers on the market are great at kind of sifting through that data and providing comprehensive coverage, where it can be so unclear what the prospect is and how you match.
If I can just add a comment, sorry, Leonie, completely agree. And back to Ruth's comment about having multiple providers, makes a whole lot of sense. If we're doing a deep enhanced due diligence report on an entity for a client, much better to have false positives than to have false negatives and miss possible flags. The other thing, I think, to Leonie's point, the global sanctions lists is a pretty finite list. We know where they are, we know where they sit, we know what's in them. PEP lists, again, you can look at the FATF recommendations of how you define a PEP, but then it's pretty subjective after that. And adverse media, as you've been saying, there's a whole database. Where do you stop? You move into social media. How historically far do you go back to look at media for adverse flags, etc. Now, within that, I'll just add another little wrinkle. We work, as I mentioned before, in the Middle East very deeply. So a lot of the sources we're looking at are Arabic. Now, we can spell Muhammad in any number of different ways using the Latin character set. There's one proper spelling in Arabic. There's all the media, historical media, there are ownership structures, there's the patriarchal naming system. It plays havoc, certainly with AI engines and OCR and everything else, but it's a wrinkle that causes a lot of problems. Not a lot of problems, it's a challenge we have to overcome.
So how did you overcome that? Sorry, Leonie.
What do you do to matching algorithms? Because I'm sure that's one of your topics to go to for this session. I mean, yeah.
Sorry, go ahead. I was just gonna.
No, that's it. I was just saying it'd be a good time to talk about the transposition, all the different types of mechanisms through which foreign names, I say foreign, sorry.
Yeah, that's precisely what I was going to get into. So a lot of you have international clients or clients who have international clients. Now, James, you guys work in a very kind of a manual region. Is that fair to say, where things aren't digital, right? So to get that KYB data, you're probably sending a man on the ground. Talk to me about how do you guys actually get your clients to verify these individuals through screening, and why you didn't choose the typical databases and you had to create it your own?
Yeah, it's really interesting. So the challenge starts with the actual availability of data. So, like all of us, we have clients who need to do due diligence on onboarding or periodic refreshes or whatever it might be, or investigations or whatever on a particular entity. It could be, we could start with an organization, so a company, and the people associated with it. So, of course, you have to start with the data. Now, our clients may have got documentation from their customers, which we then have to review, but actually our business model at Diligencia is to ignore anything that the client has provided to our customer, if you see what I mean, and go to the registries, the official gazettes, chambers of commerce, and get the originating document. Given the jurisdictions we work in, it's a very fragmented approach, and it may be very non-digitized. So I can name any number of West African registries that are still paper-based, and there are 4-foot-high lever arch files in rooms, and you have to get the Articles Association or whatever. North Africa, Egypt, for example, we might have to go to 4 different sources to create just a corporate profile, a standard corporate profile, the like of which you'd get into Companies House. And it may be, as I say, in Arabic, and maybe on a printed document, a PDF, non-digitized. So it's fragmented. There are protectionist jurisdictions where some of the free zones are set up specifically to sort of obfuscate ownership structures for reasons that are culturally sort of normal in those particular jurisdictions. So starting by getting the accurate information, which will be names, ownership structures, and all the rest of it, that's our challenge. Thereafter, having got those, then there's the whole screening process. And just as I alluded to before, there's a transliteration, translation of, for example, Arabic or Farsi, or it could be Portuguese from Angola, Mozambique, whatever, into the Latin character set. And the use of screening tools, be it Comply Advantage, which we use, or LexisNexis or Dow Jones or whatever, can they search through Arabic languages or foreign languages, etc. So that's the challenge. So our particular challenge at Diligencia is surfacing the information. The next step in meeting our clients' requirements is to make sure it's screened properly. And there's a whole load of, AI is fantastic in the sense that it's really, it's the topic we're all talking about. And OCR, has been around for a long time, but there are challenges in how the data that we've got are interpreted and matched against global sanctions lists, PEPs, adverse media, etc.
So just on that, Klaus, you are Hong Kong based, right, and deal with a lot of similar problems over there with names and variations. How are you dealing with that, and how did you originally kind of add screening as a module there? Was it based on client demand, or?
No, we always wanted to integrate that because it's a nice onboarding flow when you can supply the documents, extract the data, then find the structure, then run them through screening. So screening was always plugged in, but not developed by us. We always wanted to, because our customers would not trust a newcomer to that very easily. We always wanted to work with one of the established ones. Now, I do remember one funny fact about this foreign character sets, and that is when we first contracted to integrate Thomson Reuters at the time. This was before Refinitiv, before LSEC. They had 2 files. They had one file, but you literally download them with all the data with all the names, but was only Latin character set. And then they had a second file that just had the foreign character sets, transliterations, and combinations. So you had to look at someone up in two files where you said, oh, this is Li Ka-ching. And if you use the Chinese characters, you need to use that international second data set to even look them up. Now, meanwhile, in WorldCheck 1 and so on, it's all integrated, and they've moved, but you can see the roots, and this is only 10 years. This is only 10 years. The roots of that are kind of new. So when we started, it was difficult in Asia, and it still is challenging because of the dominance of the Latin character set and sanctions. And so the adverse media, especially, often only being published referring to the Latin character set. We have the exact same problems as James has in the Asian countries, may it be China, may it be Thailand. All these have their own transliterations and fun. And now, this is not really strictly what we concentrate on. We deal with it. We deal with it by referring to all of them. And same here, it's important to catch all positives and sometimes false positives rather than missing them. So we do that. But what we concentrate on is building a system that is based on live connections to company registries. Now, James has an additional problem there with his specific area where we are not really active, and we really need to work together, James. We have a lot of good connections in all over the world, especially Asia, Europe, also Americas, where that is possible. And these connections are live. So what we didn't build was a database that just contains last year's or last month's or months ago data. It's always live. So when you ask the system, it goes out then. For us, the main difference or the main interest of why we did this was that it makes no sense for anybody screening here to screen a corporate structure as it was 2 years ago. You need to screen the corporate structure as it is today. Who is director today of that parent company 2 levels up? Not who was when they applied and then continue to screen every day on the same data. And that's the USP that we have in our solution. Because it's always live, you can always look at the current set. That's really our difference there.
Thank you for that.
The question. Yeah.
So I want to go to some risk management platforms and then to the verification platforms and then get Zenoo's thoughts on everything as well. So when I say risk management, I'm talking more about Forsyte and Flagright here. So one for Flagright, talk to me about the counterparty screening for your clients, and talk to me about when you were guys building your kind of due diligence and verification, just when a bank is doing due diligence on counterparty or screening, what were the important factors you wanted in there? Was it AI? Was it more depth? Was it more watch list? Kind of talk to me about that module. And then, of course, Tracy, a follow-up for you is, are you guys looking to be like Zenoo, agnostic, or would you guys have your own screening overlays or your own AI overlays that can aid your users with figuring out what is going on in this case? So yeah, if Amy, you could answer that first and then Tracy follow up, that'd be great.
So for counterparty screening on payment, our customers are looking at various watch lists like sanctions and PEPs to understand if the individuals that are receiving the transaction or businesses that are receiving transaction are potentially sanctions or PEPs. So abilities there, include configurable screening builder where you can have different configurations and logics built out for different markets or different product types or different payment types. And then in the investigation part, we do have AI agents that are specifically enabled to deal with counterparty screening and resolve low risk alerts, which have an extremely high of being a false positive.
If you don't mind me asking there, some of the banks I speak to are always looking for more typology and data on what they're scanning for. So IP address, what phone was used, what were the locations when they were doing an activity or a transaction. Do you guys look at broader due diligence than just screening? And is your AI looking at anything else at the moment, or?
Yeah, absolutely. So if we talk more broadly about financial crime risk across transaction monitoring, we have a range of typologies that our banking clients and financial services clients are looking at. So these can be things like IP address sharing, device sharing across numerous users, etc., and then highlighting the risks associated with that. So that's a very common methodology that banks are using. Other methodologies include things like, very low deposits, frequency of deposits, for example. And there's a whole host of rules that we have set up out of the box or that can be configured specifically for organizations that look at velocity, anomaly detection. So simply, all our customers typically transact between the hours of 9 and 5 p.m. or business working hours. A client has started, sending high frequency transactions or high value transactions at 3 a.m. That's obviously anomalous behavior. You'll want to automatically block or stop that, suspend it until it's been reviewed by an investigator or an analyst.
Great, thank you. Because what I'm describing here is a screening, not just AML, but the entirety and the broader due diligence that you're doing. And when you're looking at due diligence, Tracy, you guys have created a risk management due diligence platform for legal. The screening is currently done through API. How important is screening when spotting risk for lawyers? And usually it's just hidden in a PDF on somebody's case management system,
well, I was going
right?
to say, you say API quite strongly there, Aslan. We've had
Sorry.
to diversify. No, like quite rightly. That's where we started. The solution has moved on quite significantly then. I think somebody mentioned quite old technology, OCRing earlier, which is still part of our platform. We have our own large language model now as well, which will ingest unstructured data from pretty much anywhere. In terms of your question about are we agnostic, I say we're selectively agnostic. If somebody came to us with what we would perceive to be, and this is not us being subjective, but somebody that we'd never come across in the market, that we hadn't had good credentials or had a good reputation in the market, then we might advise differently. But if it was a well-known player, then absolutely we would ingest and we would help them decipher that data in whatever the most applicable way to do that would be. Now, that depends on where the data is coming from. So lots of the technology providers on here will do a lot of the heavy lifting on PEPs and sanction screening already within their own app, in which case the value that we add is quite thin on that. Some other providers are actually pretty poor at that. It's part of a very small part of what they do. And things like whitelisting is very, very difficult, especially in legal. Harriet's nodding, she knows this. I'm not going to name any names, obviously, but some of the capability to say this is not my client or this is my client, even when you've done the research yourself and you've done the heavy lifting as a person and gone through that, there's no capability to say, yes, this is a false positive or it's a false negative, as James said. So the degree to which we add value to that depends on the source of the data, but we try not to influence our clients really in terms of who their PEPs and sanction screening person is. We can certainly add value on top of that with AI, but as I said, for a lot of players in the legal industry, that will be done to a certain degree already. Financial services is the same. We don't service financial services at the moment, not to say that we can't, but we're very specific on our firms at the moment. Makes sense.
Now, Harriet, Leonie, and Ruth, talk to me about, you guys are verification providers and you provide the whole suite, right? You're trying to provide KYC, KYB, and screening all together. What does screening mean to you guys, and how much are you investing in the product? You could have a bulk remediation, you could have the best fuzzy match settings, you could add filters to it, you could add AI to it, you could add multiple providers. So where is enough, and where are you guys investing into when it comes to screening?
Can I just quickly jump in on something that Amy said to create the cohesion in the conversation? Is that I think there's a very different risk proposition for counterparty screening. I think it's very different risk proposition to client screening and what I would call connected parties to clients. And going back to Johnny's point again, to have a tool that does all of that is quite difficult because they are very different. You're looking for different things at each kind of juncture in those different counterparty sets or individual sets. So I think that's probably something important to bear in mind. From our platform, we are always considering that as we embed risk assessment, and we're considering how the screening tool interacts with those risk assessments throughout, because I think it's an ongoing journey of risk assessment activity dovetailing with your screening needs, to create a fully cohesive picture is critical, and I think that's really hard to achieve, but we try.
I think one of the interesting things, and predominantly we service the legal market as well. Like Tracy said, we do work with accountancy firms, we do work with estate agents and letting agents and things like that. But predominantly, I would say our clients are legal, in the legal space. I think the difficulty with some of this conversation for some of our clients is that they don't have the specialist knowledge. So where we're talking about what it needs to do globally to give them the result output that they need, that can be quite challenging for them to kind of get their head around. And I think Amy mentioned it right at the start. When there's configuration options on the table, they can become overwhelming quite quickly. Some of the way that the suppliers for screening work, the options are endless, and there's so many different variations that you can go with that manipulate the output. But ultimately, a lot of our clients just want to know that they are compliant and that they're doing it in the best way for them. But obviously, getting to that end point can be quite hard to navigate. And even when you are in a lot of these conversations, it can be like cutting through a lot of those options and things like that, and working out, well, where have I missed something? Has it missed something? Is it as accurate as I want it to be or need it to be? That's quite a hard game to play, and it's often like a tightrope that you're walking, and it's quite easily to go one way or the other. And I think that's we kind of have to recognize that whilst you guys talk really eloquently about some of these options and the things that you know, and you're in it day to day, for a lot of our clients it's actually quite overwhelming, especially when they're faced with all of those options. But I think we're definitely seeing, and I've certainly seen in this last 12-18 months, this idea that screening isn't just PEPs and sanctions. And I always try and steer the conversation away from and marketing messaging around PEPs and sanctions is the only screening, because it's definitely not. And at one point in time, people were saying, well, why am I seeing this if it's PEPs and sanctions? But it's because it's not PEPs and sanctions screening. The screening is much more holistic than that. And actually, when suppliers have built the data sets that they've got, they're to meet a real broad range of the market. So understanding, like, say, what you need from it or what your clients need from it, that's quite important, so that you can slim it down. But we've definitely seen a move towards this idea, and Amy talked about it really eloquently there, around this idea of intelligent, risk-based, contextual due diligence screening. And actually, within the legal space, I think that we're maybe a little bit behind where Amy talked about being around those additional risk markers, but we're seeing real strong interest in people wanting to see similar levels of risk indicators and risk signals, be that, have I seen this person before? Have they changed the document that they're coming with? Did I reject them before and have they come back? Are they trying different law firms across the area? All of those great insights that actually would affect my output and help me succeed in identifying fraud, money laundering, sanctions risk. Signals are much broader, and I think that's a really important topic that's maybe not quite as talked about, and we do always seem to see people hone in on the word PEP and sanctions, but actually probably both of those wouldn't help us stop like the fraud and the money laundering angle. So again, it depends what you're trying to ultimately do and what you're trying to put out as what you're trying to spot.
I think that's really interesting, Harriet, and I know you've spent many years educating law firms on why this is important, but there does seem to have been a pivotal shift, I think, specifically over the last couple of years, where people are like, anti-money laundering is one element of this. Yeah. There's a much wider risk picture here. Yeah. And one of my frustrations is that people always they lump PEPs and sanctions together, and then they lump adverse media onto that, and they are three very distinct things. Of course, they're interconnected, but they're mutually exclusive of each other as well. So I think that's a really, really interesting point. And the legal industry, some parts of it are waking up, but to your point, some really still need some guidance on what am I even looking at here? What am I looking for? What are the risk indicators?
Yeah, I think Tracy, you're spot on. We work with kind of 30% of the top 100 UK law firms at the moment, and I think there's a massive gap between the larger law firms who have, say, a 10 or 15 person AML team. So often it's kind of the fee earners themselves are just putting in basic data, then it actually goes to a specialized AML team that are doing all the work, and it's just been kind of signed off at the end by the partner or the relevant fee earner. Whereas you've got on the other end these smaller firms where it might be a partner that's just been thrown on the duties of MLRO, the money laundering officer, and just like, okay, what do I do? Where do I start? And I think that that's part of kind of the conversation you have to have with a prospective client is, do you know what you're doing? Do you not know? Do you need our assistance? Do you need our hand holding? And that's where kind of us as software providers need to understand exactly what level a firm is actually currently operating and understand how much assistance they need. We, as I mentioned, we have some firms that are using 3 or 4 different providers to carry out just even basic kind of adverse media checks, etc. Just really, and they have an analyst sitting there, and their job all day is to just look and compare all of these different data sets. On the other hand, you've got a much smaller firm, which again, Thirdfort, I'm sure you have quite a few of these, where they just want to quickly onboard as soon as they can, so they can get on with sale of a property or whatever else it is they're doing. And I think you really have to carefully see exactly what the needs are of the specific firms or clients.
I think the challenge, Ruth, is that a lot of them don't even know their own risk appetite. I heard somebody really succinctly describe this at an event last week, which was like, may not be PEPs or sanctioned, but you might do like childcare work. And then do you want to be representing a sex offender if you're doing childcare work? Like, and it's really incongruous. And it's such an obvious, easy example that you could give to your fee earners, but one that I invariably have never heard. I've been doing this for a very long time now. And last week was like the most succinct way that I'd heard that be presented. They're never going to come up as a sanction. You know, they're not a Russian oligarch, and they're not a politically exposed person in any way, but that is so incongruous with who you would want to be representing that, like, just lumping those things together for screening is wild to me. But I'm sure Harriet sees it all the time in her training as well.
So guys, just on that, so when I was speaking to a few banks, they gave me a typology list of 300 kind of factors of Phoenix companies, shell companies, repeat registrations, and all of these other stuff that is about somebody's identity, behavior, or company patterns on company's house, and where they're involved. For instance, has Arslan registered in the same dodgy address that thousands of Chinese are registering today? And how legitimate is that address? So if that is the future of screening, and Harriet and Amy, as you're rightly pointing out, then is it not true that the databases that we're speaking of, the old databases, are not designed to spot risk in today's world? They're designed to spot risk in 10, 20 years ago, when it was those tag based and people wouldn't change their business name. I'll just give you one example. I tried to find somebody's screening records, give it to 10 prominent providers that probably some of you use here. They could not find it because the name of the individual changed, and he changed his business name every year. That's it. And it was 20 years ago. So it was just out of date. And then major banks and major financial institutions cannot spot that risk because it's not on a PEP, sanctions, or classic adverse media. You have to browse the web completely to find other data points. So how do you guys feel about that? And is that what you're looking to build to service your financial service clients or your legal clients?
So I think, I mean, we have a pretty broad range of customers. Sounds like everyone else does too. You know, we onboard contractors at NASA through to, you know, we do with the World Bank to do seed funds, not VC funds, actual funding for seeds to put in the ground in Burma. So it's quite wide and varied. And identity, as we've all discussed quite ad nauseum, is local. And we're trying to say, here is a global panacea. It doesn't work. We've got two situations from KYB point of view, right, Klaus? The European business activity and the European business wallet is going to take away a lot of the basic registration challenges that we currently have. And then it's going to be attestation of that wallet and other further data to enrich it. We were quite surprised. We tried about 3 months ago, we put a new agent into a client, and it did the searches and it enriched with LinkedIn information or certain other social media information or content. And it was so much more used or so much more utilized than we ever anticipated, because it wasn't the database of record. It wasn't sitting there coming from the Refinitives database, which has been there for years and is very well respected. So I think those things are, and other risk signals are certainly stronger. I think the challenge, and to Tracy's point, is there's a lot of organizations now who didn't grow up with regulatory compliance. They have been disrupted by compliance and regulation rather than having a choice. And they look at regulation as, we look at it, it gets you on the starting grid. For them, it's the finish line. And therein lies the challenge. Where is this risk modeling going to go? We've been trying to build, and I don't know, probably you guys have done something similar in terms of how do we model the existing risk matrix that customer has agreed and set, and then put it through an AI tool to say, well, if we rejig that, made recommendations on it, where does that leave those thresholds, and how much percentage would have actually been straight through processing, and how much would have actually gone for manual review and case management? And it can be, depending on those signals, it can be pretty aggressive. You suddenly going, actually, the geography is now a factor, the device IP is now a factor, and these other things are drawn into it. It makes it a lot more complicated. And let's be honest, outside the identity bubble, where we all sit and where we all talk about this complexity because it's the day we leave. I'm going through a purchase of a property at the moment. My solicitor asked me to bring in my passport and if I could fax my contract. I said, I can't fax it from here. Like, where do you live? Or 2026, so the reality is somewhat different for these smaller organizations. I think we can make it more user-friendly. I think with AI, as long as it's an overlay, and AI is in the deck rather than core in the data, where we're starting to really change some underlying factors of it, we can give these users the tools where they're not going to have to think about it too hard. But in doing so, for those AML curious organizations rather than AML expert organizations, that poses an even greater risk because they've now created a black box by using AI. And we all do this to some extent. Well, it came out of ChatGPT, it must be true,
So for you
I
guys,
think
Johnny,
the risk.
Johnny, because I don't think a lot of people know what Zenoo does. So would you mind giving me a very quick, I mean, I can do it, but you guys orchestrate. So you guys are actually like a marketplace, aren't you?
Yeah, so we have a no-code orchestration platform, and we've been doing that for about the 10 years. We started similar to you, Klaus, with the Experian and TransUnion out in APAC, and then moved across to the US and around the world. So we have an orchestration tool, which we have a fast integration agent, so we can bring in people's APIs relatively quickly, SDKs for identity schemes, and obviously KYB, range of different services and opportunities to do so. Built in dynamics.
Johnny, just because we're short on time, we have 9 minutes. I'm just going to breeze through to everybody else. Guys, just on the question of, are you adding more to your screening? And how do you feel about the fact that a lot of the risk data sits outside PEP sanctions, adverse media? What are you guys doing about that?
I think it's an amazing time that we live in at the moment. There's more data available than ever before, but it's an arms race. Both sides, the fraudsters, the money launderers, and we on the good side are fighting to keep the upper hand. Both sides have to race here. And I think the important bit is that, yes, use all the latest technologies, use all the latest data sources. But I think in respect to data, and Johnny will agree here, or like that's what I learned from you as well. The clean data is the underlying everything, the right decisions is the battleground at the moment, because there's so much data coming in from so many sources with AI that is multiplied, but the reliability and where it's actually from, that is the question on most of us. So to find the right combination of suppliers and contracting and so on, that gives you that total reliability, I think is one of the key battlegrounds in this arms race, just from my side.
I completely agree. I think, sorry, just very briefly, the advent of AI means obviously automation, speeding things up, removal of some of the manual stuff. I would suggest that AI and technology is used to do the low risk stuff really well and really fast, and always escalate the high risk stuff to people. I mean, call me old fashioned. But I think that's kind of where it's going. I would say for Johnny, with your property transaction, you need to speak to Thirdfort.
Noted.
Just to add to that, also kind of the legal sector is that 100% these AI tools should be integrated and utilized, with the big caveat, though, that the SRA at least expect you to have everything documented and human to have reviewed it, and to actually have a human decision making rather than it being an automated decision making. So 100% these tools should help speed things up and kind of onboard clients, prospects sooner as soon as possible, but make sure everything is documented and make sure you've got the ongoing monitoring piece documented as well, to ensure that you've got a trail should you be audited, to avoid any fines in the future.
I would continue that as well. So to answer your question, I think all of us, if you're working in a tech company, are definitely talking about AI in the future and what utopia might look like in 5, 10, 15 years. Like, I mean, you can't even really dream it in some ways. Like, I do always say, like, if I'd have asked my mum and dad where we would have been today, I don't think they would have predicted that technology would have advanced in the way it maybe has. And so planning for such a far place in time is quite tricky, but we've all got ideas of what we think might be possible. And I certainly work with a bunch of really intelligent engineers who've got brains much smarter than my own, I'm sure. And they are very excited about the prospect of what AI can bring. But we also have to, with my risk and compliance hat and my legal hat on, we're always balancing that with obviously consumer safety, protection. Obviously, we are working with really sensitive data a lot of the time. And we have to remember there's a human that belongs to as well in this process. But we're also working with clients. And as Ruth alluded to, transparency is kind of key, particularly with our legal clients. They're maybe not as far forward as much as they like to think they are with the tech journey. They are quite hesitant as well about the risks that AI brings to their journey, whilst they are excited a little bit, but I would say they're more hesitant about actually what does this expose us to? What does this open up to? And actually, how does that work and interplay with us? And so transparency is a real key. And so we're currently having a lot of conversations around how do we balance the excitement and the things that AI can bring and the prospects, because they are endless. But actually then how do we bring that to market in a safe manner, but also in a manner that our clients would appreciate, as well as the regulators above them. Although we have seen appetite from the SRA that they are interested in AI. They are very forward thinking in some ways around AI, and obviously allowing an AI-based law firm to operate and give advice as well, but with strict guidelines around the quality, the assurance piece, and the reliability piece. So there was a big test piece that had to go accompanying it to show that you could put that trust in it.
Cool. And then Leonie, you guys are building a digital wallet. So what we're talking about with trust and clean data going in.
And trying to get to grips with the EU rules around that and what that looks like is tricky. And I think there's some lack of clarity, across the board around that. And it may well, it will be the gold standard of kind of identity, and therefore the screening and the approach to due diligence around that will need to be of the same critical standards. I just want to pick up on something Ruth said. I think it's very important, is that you can have all the tech solutions, but if the user interface and the record keeping side of it is not right, you will fall foul of regulatory scrutiny. So I think not forgetting that piece, and the human decision making and the rationale around the decision making at the end is critical, because you can't just point at the tool and say, well, it spat out that, therefore I'm happy. So
that, Leonie, but sadly not.
yeah. So I think that's something I'm always holding the flag for within our organisation versus the tech guys, to kind of bring it back to reality and say, no, we need to have the ability to do that. So I would just wave the flag for that. Sorry, go on, Tracy.
No, I was saying, most law firms would love that. I've been in a commercial negotiation this week where they wanted us to take full liability for whatever the AI said. They might have to walk away from this one, sadly.
So just a quick question for Amy here and Tracy. Again, back to what we were saying. What are your last comments on? Actually, for Amy, I think it's quite different to what we're saying, because I'm not necessarily asking the question of AI here. What I'm saying is the further data, the typologies that we speak of are no longer just needs of banks. They're also the needs of law firms, as Harriet said. So how are we doing with adding these typologies to our databases, to our screening, to give our users more data? But then on the other hand, right, law firms don't want to pay for more, right? they're happy with their adverse media. A penny more will cause a whole scene. So, Amy, talk to me about these typologies, what your futures are with AI, and what you're doing as well there.
So I think just to reiterate what most people on the call have already said, human in the loop and a risk-based approach here are critical. And that applies across monitoring, screening, and investigations, and in all these verticals. I'm definitely not an expert in law, so I can't speak to that specific use case, but I'd love to perhaps follow up with conversations with Harriet and others on the call, Tracy, who are working with law firms, about how they could potentially use services like Flagright's monitoring capabilities outside the core screening, sanctions, and PEP risk in order to, detect financial crime, whether that be fraud or AML. But for us, it's really going to be about continuing to streamline financial crime operating within banks, gaming companies, and payment companies. It's about reducing friction and streamlining investigations, as I mentioned. But critically, as everyone has already said in this call, it can't be a black box. And, the AI agents, the human in the loop element, and the guardrails have to be in place to ensure that there's a natural language narrative which can be easily audited by internal audited regulator and others. And we're already at time. Tracy, go ahead. Sorry.
No, don't worry. I just saw the time and I've got a commercial meeting. I would love to connect to their one separately. Thank you so much, Aslin. I was very well entrenched in that conversation then. Thank you. I will chat to you all soon. Take care, guys. Bye.
Aslin, you're muted.
Oh, apologies for that. I was going on a whole story about something. No, I'm joking. Let's have a kind of a 1 minute outro. Leave your lasting comments. I'm not in a rush necessarily to close this off. It's 2 hours. We're going for 2 hours now. But yeah, feel free to take your time to make a closing statement about your business and the topic of today.
I'll just give an anecdote, if I may. I've been in this business a long time, and post 9/11, of course, there was a whole raft of new regulations to do with KYC, AML, or counterterrorism financing, etc. And I was in the financial services space, dealing with large banks. The compliance officers were being asked to do so much more with so less resource. They were always chasing their tails. It very much became a box-ticking exercise. Maybe it's just because I'm older, but things seem to have really changed. The whole AML, KYC, screening, risk-based process is very much realer now than I think it's ever been because of the disrupted world we live in. The stuff we are dealing with now is real stuff. And so the advent of fantastic tools like AI and everything else is wonderful in creating efficiencies and all the rest of it. But you've got to have this human oversight of this thing before the thing runs away with you. And I'm going back to accuracy of original data, really understanding ownership structures, all that kind of stuff. So AI and all the rest, technology, fantastic tools. But I think we're living in such a world where it's real screening in context is so appropriate. So it isn't just PEP sanctions and adverse media. It's much bigger than that. It's about complex routing of payments. It's about different changes of behavior of a particular company, all that sort of stuff. So it's a very interesting space to be in at the minute.
Well, and we hope, as you say, James, that there isn't amongst executives a fall back to the position of stripping resources, because although we're all here to provide, assistance and support to compliance functions in different industries and in different ways, it's the criminals are only growing more adept at evading these sorts of screening. So the resourcing must be there to combat that. Otherwise, we will fail.
I probably would. We are failing, right? At the moment, the criminals are winning. However hard we try, we're following regulations, whereas we need to be following risk and fraud. We probably need to work together more. I think there's a lot of disruptive businesses that are coming in, to your point, Arslan, who are potentially uprooting that traditional big database structure about this is the Bible according to KYB, and I think there are some very confused customers out there. Certainly, we come across them who are either victim of marketing hyperbole, which we all have. Most of us have marketing departments whose job it is to try and tell the best version of our truth. But I think there needs to be more conversations like this, where they're surfacing the strengths and the weaknesses, and the fact that what we do is local, it is by use case, and it is not a global panacea as much as we love it to be. The technology is getting better day by day that we can do those things and be multi-jurisdictional. But at the end of the day, humanity is separated by language, it's separated by geography, and it's separated by regulations. And until the technology can bridge all those gaps, we're still going to have some pretty complex business requirements across these operational compliance teams. And I think the fact that you've brought together some businesses here that address that is great. And hopefully the people watching and listening to this have had some insights and some transparency and some honesty from us of where it does work. We've just got a long way to go to even think about catching up, because criminals don't have procurement teams. They don't have structured, legal requirements to be able to get across. They don't have the EU AI Act looming down on them, right? They just do what they want. And we've got to find ways of fighting better at that.
Yeah, and I think it's also, everyone needs to just remember ultimately that compliance isn't a tick box exercise, because as you said, the fraudsters will find ways to get through those tick box exercises, and you really need to make sure you've got like a truly risk-based end-to-end process, and have the confidence to go and feel confident that what you have can be audited, and you feel comfortable should not to come knocking on your door.
Yeah, I think I would say, I might work for Thirdfort, but you would never hear me say out loud that Thirdfort's the only option. And I think it's just that honesty that, like, there isn't a single right model, there isn't a single right approach, and it's going to be different for everybody. And it's sometimes saying that out loud to people, and they might think, oh, well, I'm only here to sell myself, and I'm not, because I work in compliance, I work in risk and compliance, and I have for a long time, because I want to do the right thing, and I want us to actually make a difference. To your point, Johnny, I want us to eventually win that battle, and I'd like to see that within my career, for us to be on the other side of that conversation and be in a much more powerful, dominant position where we can have confidence to say, actually, we are making the difference that we dreamed that we would make in this conversation today. And sometimes for businesses, we're not the right fit, and one of you guys might be the right fit in that conversation, and that's the right thing to do, and that's the right thing to say. And I would much rather stand behind that and be authentic than sell people a dream and actually they don't get it. And I've been in the other seat where I've been in the firm and people have sold me the stars and the moons, and I've started using the product and I'm like, this doesn't do what you told me it do, and you feel missold to, you feel mistreated in that conversation. And I definitely would never want to put myself in that position of being in a supplier where that's the case. But one of the things I wrote when you put the little bullet points together and sent them before the session was moving away from data collection to satisfying, like moving away from actually just collecting documents to satisfy compliance, to actually connecting data and understanding risk. And for me, that's the important thing. And just saying about ticking boxes, but in a different way.
From my viewpoint here, I get away from this from this little panel here and this discussion actually more positive. Yes, the challenges multiply. Yes, the complexities grow and all, but here are people who actually know what you're doing, where we're all concentrated and focused on the right side. And I think that accounts for a lot. And I think together and as an industry in our various different functions, and yes, it's never just one solution that's the perfect fit. We're actually moving stuff here and we're making the world better. I'd rather keep on that side and not despair of the challenges.
I'd say one thing. Sorry, just Amy. That's one thing. You make that point. I wish marketing teams would stop claiming to have coverage of more people that actually have addresses in the world. You know, I think this is not fair on the market.
And more countries than there are countries in the world. 250 countries.
I know AI slop is good for marketing, but we need to be ready. We have to look at ourselves to some extent too. Apologies, Amy. I just did a typical bloke thing and interrupted. So my apologies.
Don't worry at all. Thanks, Johnny. I think just to reflect on what everyone's summarized, that's what ultimately we probably all love about working in this space, in this community, is that to Harriet's point, not only do we want to not sell or promote products that won't solve companies' operational needs, but also ultimately we're solving real world problems here. So at the end of the day, we're hopefully preventing, fraud victims and, not and detecting serious criminal networks. And I just hope that, the enhancements that we're continuing to make to our product and, that everyone else in the room is to theirs will enable our customers to move from not just reacting to financial crime, but actually preventing it and starting to win the battle against, fraudsters and criminals, but also focus their attention on, real suspicious activity rather than repetitive, monotonous alerts.
Here.
Thank you all. Here, as you said. Just a quick overview of everybody here. Johnny Davis from Zenoo orchestration platform. They have hundreds of tools in their marketplace. You just select whatever you want, put it together, and create a client onboarding tool that is tailored to you. Klaus, CEO of Know Your Customer, global coverage, direct registry access to the toughest jurisdictions in the world, especially the APAC region. Now, I know a lot of law firms that struggle with actually verifying who are these companies. Do they have ties with the Chinese government? Yes, probably they do. And then we have Omni. You can definitely help them. And then we have VinciWorks, and they have a fantastic S-tier tool for law firms. I've seen it, love it. Very comprehensive and covers everything from KYC. Has a bunch of KYC providers. I think Thirdfort is one of your providers, Credus, and a bunch of others.
They are, yeah.
There you go. So, and then Diligencia, saw it recently, loved it. They make the job of sending a man on the ground to Africa, grab the KYB document, read, translate, and give you that data similar to Know Your Customer. Superbly useful for those regions. And then Thirdfort, the leading provider when it comes to property, legal, identity verification. Solid tool. I've gone against them, and it was difficult trying to remove clients from them. Leonie Tabor from SIMUR, they're building a slick digital wallet tool, a full client onboarding tool for digital wallet. If that works out, I really hope it does, because that will save all of our lives from having to re-verify every single time. And then Amy from Flagright, really slick tool. Probably, I've said this to Amy, and I'll say it again loud here. Probably the slickest interface when it comes to UX, UI, how data dynamically moves from one area to another. Highly urge you guys to look at the way it was built. Thank you guys so much. Pleasure doing this with you all, and hopefully we can do another one soon.
Thank you. It's nice to meet you all.
Thanks, guys.
Good to see you.
Thanks for having us.
Bye.
Take care, guys. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye.